90% of startup founders feel guilty about paying themselves a salary, but neglecting to do so contributes to one of the biggest causes of startup failure, which is burnout. So today I want to talk about startup compensation and how much you as a founder should pay yourself depending on the size of your company. I want to clear the air here. If you're doing something crazy and ambitious like starting a company, you're going to need to be in your absolute best headspace. Building a company is really hard, and it's way harder if you're constantly stressed out about money. Fighting with your spouse or trying to stand up a side hustle so that you can make ends meet is not a conducive environment to building a happy and healthy work culture, and it's certainly not going to help you grow your revenue. Now, despite this, founders still feel guilty about paying themselves a fair salary. If the company is not where it needs to be, which, by the way, you never think that it is, then who are you to pay yourself a decent salary? This all gets even more complicated whenever you bring investors into the mix. I mean, you just asked some pretty intimidating people for a bunch of money, and now you're going to turn around and give a chunk of that money to yourself. It's like the nerve, and God forbid you pay yourself a salary that's competitive with the open market. Now, that would basically make you a con artist, or at least some founders would think so. So founders consistently feel weird about doing this. At least I did. Whenever I first started Forecaster, I had no idea what to pay myself. And I convinced myself that I needed to take a significant pay cut to make it seem like I'm scrappy enough to be a startup founder. And I did that for about 2 years. I paid myself about 30% less than I was making before I started the company. Definitely below my market rate. And some would argue that would make me hungrier, and I think all it really did was just stress me out a little bit more. Now, since then, I've wised up a little bit. Now I pay myself a fair salary. But I often revisit my original decision and wonder if it was truly necessary to pay myself so little, or if I would have made better decisions if I was in a more comfortable spot. Founders already sacrifice a ton. They put their relationships in jeopardy, they work longer hours than they otherwise would, and sometimes they get made fun of by their friends for making stupid, cheesy YouTube videos like this one. Nowadays, I always encourage founders to pay themselves, and pay themselves a salary that is reasonable. But founders are in a unique situation where they can effectively set their own salaries, which is a bit of a moral obligation to it. For example, I once heard tale of this founder that raised $1 million in a seed round, and then he paid himself $600,000 in the first year, and then he fled to Mexico whenever the company failed a year later. Now, not only is this super immoral, but it was effectively the end of this person's career as a founder, forever. You might be able to get away with something like that once, but you're never going to be able to do that again. So I tell founders to do this. Think of a number that will ensure that you don't have to worry about money within your current means. Now, I'm not talking about a number that guarantees that you can go out and do whatever you want and never have to think about the financial consequences. I mean a number that will stop you from laying awake at night worrying about your upcoming credit card bills. Now, this number is going to be different for everybody, and it depends on your family size, your location, and your age, but I like to use this as a guiding framework. Now, there are surveys out there that can tell us what a typical startup founder should be making, and I'm going to go over those numbers here in a minute, don't worry. But remember that everybody's situation is unique. Just because some spreadsheet tells you that this is what you should be making doesn't necessarily mean that it's right for you. And now that I've said all that, I can get off my pedestal and we can take a look at the data. All of this data comes from the 2020 Venture Capital Executive Compensation Survey and Technology Report. Now, they collected data on over 2,000 startup founders, and it allows you to slice and dice the data by position in the company, region, revenue, headcount, and a lot more. And today I want to focus on the startup founder and CEO salaries, broken out by funding round. We can take a look at seed to Series B salaries and equity ownerships, and hopefully it will give you a decent idea of where you fall. And starting with the seed round, the average base salary is $108,000 per year. The bottom 25% of founders make $75,000 per year, and the top 20% make $150,000 a year. And on average, founders were not paid bonuses or commissions at the seed stage. Now, the average ownership at the seed stage was just over 31% as well. The bottom 25% owned 22% of the company, and the top 25% owned over 41%. Now I want to take a look at Series A funded companies. The average base salary here moved up to $170,000 per year. The bottom 25% of founders made $132,000, and the top 25% made $200,000. And on average, founders were not paid bonuses or commissions again at the Series A stage. The average ownership at this stage was just over 18%. The bottom 25% owned 12% of the company, and the top 25% owned over 25% of the company. And last but not least, I want to look at Series B funded companies. The average base salary here moved up to $215,000 per year. The bottom 25% of founders made $164,000, and the top 25% made $250,000. Only the top 25% of founders at this stage were paid bonuses, which amounted to roughly $50,000 a year on average. The average ownership at this stage was just over 13%, with the bottom 25% just being shy of 10%, and the top 25% owning over 18%. So that's how much money you can expect to make as a startup founder. And now that you're armed with this knowledge, click this video to learn all about startup valuations and what to expect while raising.